Are remakes good? Well, no. And that's why I'm gonna. I almost got you there, didn't I? No, I'm not one of those insults who just hate everything modern. No. However, I'm not just one of those. On the other hand, I'm not just someone who is like, oh no, you should just be grateful that game you like so much is even getting some recognition. You should just be grateful. And now, basically saying that you can't criticize a remake simply because it's giving your favorite game attention. Which, I mean, yeah, I can see where they are coming from. Like, let us enjoy this. Let us enjoy this and just be grateful that the game is even getting recognized. It's not forgotten, clearly, because because it's getting a remake. I'm in between. Um, See, especially with the God of War remake thing coming soon, TM, I began to think about this a lot because this is the first time that I'm gonna be on the side of the people who actually knew the game, and not just knew the game, but played the game multiple times beforehand and loved the game. Until now, I've always been on the other side of the spectrum. I've always been, a new player. I've always been the new guy who, has enjoyed the new rendition of the original game, and I've enjoyed. Well, okay, I'm a bit for real with you. I've never actually played a remake game. I've only really seen gameplay. So this isn't actually coming from experience as someone who has actually played remakes, but I have seen my fair share of remakes in the past, and people's reactions to it, both from people who just enjoy them from what they are, and people who complain that the games don't have the same vision and the same art direction and the same vibe, if you want to call it that, or aesthetic, or just the ambiance. I do understand, for example, with Silent Hill, the Silent Hill remake. I can understand why some people would really not like the remake. One, because it just completely changes the controls and it quote unquote modernizes them, which I think is a really stupid term. And I think that's exactly why those people kind of say it mockingly. Because, I mean, at this point, what are modern controls? Basically, when you say that a game has modern controls, you literally just mean RE2 remake controls. That's it. Just you run around, you have the camera somewhat up close but behind you and from a side angle, and from the side, and you move it with the right stick. You move the camera with the right stick, and that's it. That's modern gameplay. But I'm glad that there have been a fair share of people who don't really fuck with that kind of gameplay style. Not because it's bad, but because it's gotten so overdone. But it's not just that with the remake. I mean, with the Silent Hill remake, it's also the vibe. It's similar in some regards, for sure. I haven't played Silent Hill 2, by the way, but I have, again, same with the other cases, and especially more with this one. I've seen my fair share of gameplay of the game. I've seen my fair share of videos analyzing not just the story, but also just the way the game communicates its themes throughout, well, the gameplay, with the aesthetic and making use of the limitations of the PS2. Limitations that obviously aren't there anymore on the remake. And of course, if you hang around art or art adjacent themes, you've probably heard of the concept of limitations being actually good for creative endeavor. As in many cases, the limitations and the artist's ways of getting around that limitation to communicate something are exactly what creates some really great pieces of art. And so that was the case with PS2 games, or just many games from the past, when there were many limitations when it comes to what you could do with the capabilities of the console, obviously. And so, those working around those limitations, but still trying to communicate something, a feeling, a certain feeling, a certain sensation for the player, causes, well, is what produces, well, the Silent Hill 2 game. It's its own aesthetic, and it works for what it is. And many people have fallen in love with the story of Silent Hill 2, but there's many other people who also fell in love with the way the game presented its themes with the game's mechanics, the gameplay, the limitations, basically, the controls, the tank controls, as they call it, and just the presentation overall. It's what drives the aesthetic of the entire game and the way it shows the story. And so, coming from that perspective, I can definitely understand why someone would not like the Silent Hill 2 remake. Because, if being in the position of someone who loves not just the story of the game, but also someone who adores the creative ways in which the game worked around the limitations and, basically what the whole game feels like, then I can see why someone wouldn't like the fact that the remake changes so many things when it comes to the gameplay and how certain situations change drastically in the way they are presented. So basically, it's like an entirely different experience. And in their cases, coming from that perspective, it's worse. Why? Well, because a lot of the very specific direction decisions, the very specific artistic choices that were made, working around the limitations, are what pushed the identity of the game even more towards the player. And so, by removing the way it was presented, many of the ways everything is presented is very different, and you lose a lot of the original ideas and a lot of the original ways in which they worked around the mechanics in order to push their themes. And so a lot of nuance is lost because of that. So, coming from that perspective, maybe you can at least understand a little bit why someone wouldn't actually like a remake that changes so much. I'm not asking you to agree that, the Silent Hill 2 remake, for example, is garbage or something like that, just because it changes a lot of the gameplay mechanics or the puzzles. Now, on the other hand, coming as a new player, I can also understand why, people argue that, you know, people who are old fans should be grateful that their game is getting more recognition. And also, on top of that, is being modernized for a bigger audience. And that, kind of, it's good and bad. It brings in a lot of people who would not have played the game simply because the mechanics were a little too weird for them. Which some people see, the thing is, there's two groups of people there. I mean, like some people, well, actually, there's three. If you think about it, there's three groups of people when it comes to old mechanics that are, unconventional or somewhat just different. And that is, some people just see it as part of the experience, and that's it. They just work around it, and they see, 10 controls. They see them, and they see them as just, the way the game plays, and that's it. Then there's some people who see it as a challenge because they're not used to that kind of gameplay style, but they want to experience the game, and since they can't change the original mechanics of the game, they're gonna do it, and they see it as a challenge, and over time they realize that the mechanics aren't actually that bad. It's simply just a different way of playing games that isn't the the way we always do it now, which is the modern style of gameplay. And then there's people who simply won't play a game because it doesn't have modern play style. And to a certain extent, I can understand. I mean, if they feel like the experience isn't satisfactory in any way, if they don't feel good about playing James, um, then maybe they just don't really want to bother. People just want to have fun and experience a good story as well. Obviously, there is some nuance to what I just said, but I think you get the idea. So obviously, modernizing the game style obviously can bring in a lot more people who wouldn't play because the game looks too old, or because the game feels too old, or it just feels too awkward to them to play. And so it kind of breaks the immersion, because everything is a lot about immersion nowadays. Despite the fact that these games are actually very immersive, just not in the way it's presented now. See, back then the mechanics weren't trying to be extremely immersive in that way, but they were immersive in the way that it sells the idea that you're not really supposed to be super strong against these enemies, and you're not supposed to be just a badass. You're not Kratos walking around Silent Hill, killing, and doing the circle to all monsters. No, that's not what it is. It's not what the game was about either. And that idea was pushed by the way the mechanics worked, by making you feel like you really have to pay attention to where you move at any point. Which, along with the fixed camera angles or semi-fixed camera angles, really, sold, ideas like, I guess isolation in some cases, but also claustrophobia, or just feeling like you're really trapped with this unworldly creature, and you really just have to get around it. It's not, in many cases, it's not just something you can kill easily. But yeah, uh, I, sorry, I was lost again on the other perspective, because I do kind of agree more with that perspective. Yeah, again, so about modern audiences, I mean, it is true that it's easier for a guy, a girl, a a little girl, a little boy to pick up the game nowadays, the remake, and very easily, pick up how the game plays because it plays very similarly to many other games. And that's not necessarily a bad thing if you're looking at it from the new player perspective because they don't have that point of reference. They don't have everything I have talked about, is assuming the fact that you have actually played the game before and you're expecting certain ways for the story to be presented. But if you're a new player, then, the very first experience you get is, well, the remake and the way it presents the story. And, beyond maybe some nuances that, to older players are important, to a new player, they probably won't. And maybe, if later, if they really liked the game, they wanna, get into the original game, because they just wanna get a feel of the original experience and the original way the story was presented. They may realize that, yeah, there are a lot of nuances, a lot of extra things that really sold the way the story and the themes. But if they don't, then, well, what they get is a game with a good story and, a very, I guess you could say, kind um, game style. It's kind. If you could, it's, yeah, I mean, it's forgiving and it gives you a dodge button. I mean, that's already very forgiving. The fact that you actually get to dodge like a good athlete, from the get go. And you're very strong too, and very angry. So yeah, if you're experiencing the game for the first time and you're liking the gameplays, you're liking the puzzles, you're liking the map design, you're liking the way the game feels, but then you see these groups of old guys, old people, or older people, or just OG players. They don't have to be old necessarily. Complaining that the game isn't a one-to-one with the original. And you're sitting there like, well, man, these people are so sad. They should just go out and touch some grass. Okay, no, but like, yeah, I mean, what? I mean, regardless of whether they like it or not. I mean, I like it. I'm liking it. I'm a new player, and I mean, in many cases, remakes are not actually made for for old for the old audiences. I mean, they are and they aren't. But they're also made for new players because I mean, guess what? Companies don't really make remakes because they care about you. They make it for money, and like we all know this. So, them making a remake is just them cashing on a very massive audience because they know that the game is really well accepted as a good game when it comes to the story. So even if they change the play style, it's still a good game because the story is that good, which it is. And you know, despite the fact that these old players, these old guys say that the new gameplay ruins the experience and it really, it kills the nuance of the story and the way it presents the themes and whatever all that crap they say. To me, it just feels like they're complaining about nothing because, I mean, I'm definitely experiencing this story right here. I get to experience it firsthand with this new, with these controls that aren't awkward. So it's a way smoother experience, and I get to, I just get the story, and it's a really great story, and I think it's presented very well. See, that's a perspective of someone who hasn't played the originals. And if you think about it, that also makes sense. If you forget about the Think about any other game that you haven't played, you know, ever. You know nothing about the game, or, beyond just a couple of things. And it gets a remake. For example, let's say you haven't played, I don't know, DMC 1, for example, Devil May Cry 1. And it gets a remake. And you play it because, you heard that the DMC games are really great. And it plays awesome. Kind of like, if you are a DMC fan, let's say DMC 1 plays similar to DMC 5 or DMC 4, except with the weapons from DMC 1, but of course, that's obvious. So for a new player, that's awesome. The game feels awesome, it feels modern, it feels great, it feels fast, it feels badass. And the delivery, the acting is a lot better than the old one. That That, my friends, is also another important thing that I haven't mentioned yet. See, it really adds to the experience when the voice acting is also part of the equation. If they remake the voice acting too, which obviously they will, a lot of the funny things that were, well, funny, well, in the case of DMC1 specifically, for example, the I should have been the one to fill your sock soul with light. that that line, the way it was delivered, it's so awesome. It's funny as fuck, but it works. It works so well. But obviously, in a remake, it's not gonna sound like that. It's gonna sound like it's not gonna sound funny. Probably, it's gonna sound like it's just gonna sound dramatic, but it's not gonna have the same intonation. It's not gonna be voice acted the same way. And the same happened with the Silent Hill 2 remake, and that is another thing that OG players liked so much about the way the art direction, well, in that case, the voice acting direction was done. The way the lines were delivered was odd, but if you played the game and with the entire aesthetic of the game as context, the fact that the line delivery of the characters is odd adds to the experience. Like it like it definitely feels deliberate. Well, okay, that might be debatable. Some people might argue that it isn't and it just sounds awkward and that's it. That's fine. But there's a lot of people who really praise the voice acting and the way it was presented um, of in the OG, because it adds to the experience and the whole way the game feels. But obviously that is lost in the remake because it's obviously, modern hardware and it doesn't have the same exact kind of odd sounding direction. I mean, even back then, I think there was a bit of a remake of the voice acting for the OG Silent Hill 2 game years ago, I think, and yeah, that remake also didn't have the same direction, and it didn't sound the same way, and that's why people didn't like that. People didn't like the fact that it sounded more normal, I guess you could say, more like just regular everyday voice acting. And whether the oddness of the line deliveries was on purpose or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that to a lot of people that actually did add to the experience, well, it matters to them. But obviously, coming from the guy who's just playing the game for the first time, and you compare the voice acting just for what it is, and that's it, then obviously you're gonna say that the new voice acting is far better. Because, yeah, I mean, it is. In many ways, it is. It has modern equipment, so it sounds clearer for starters, and it also sounds, well, more acted, more normal, basically, just a very normal way to express the emotions. So that's also another way in which old players and new players would disagree on the voice acting. So are remakes bad? Remakes aren't bad. They can bring in a lot of newcomers, and some newcomers actually do go out of their way, when they like the game so much, uh, to actually go back and experience the original games, and that I like. I like the fact that new people get to experience the old games. And I mean, yeah, I mean, I do like the fact that old games, in my case, for example, the God of War trilogy, I'm glad that it's getting a remake because it's getting the recognition it deserves. I'm glad that they're not just making it a, I'm on the camp of people who are actually glad that it's getting a remake. I mean, obviously, we still don't know how the game, how the games are gonna play. You know, we don't know how much of the OG games um, gameplay style they're gonna keep, and how much of the new modern style are gonna keep. We don't know. And since we don't know, I can't really say what we're gonna get. But regardless, I am glad that it's getting the recognition it deserves because the games are great. The story is great. I mean, it's not, the main character, Kratos isn't necessarily the smartest guy out there, and he is consumed by rage in many cases. But that's his character. I mean, that's not bad writing, that's just how he is. That's just the nature of how he is. He can be very naive at times because he lets his mission, what he wants overrides logic in those games. He throws logic out the window because he wants something. He needs something. He doesn't just want something. He needs vengeance. So I don't know what's gonna happen with the remake. I don't know if it's gonna be 3 remakes or if it's gonna be 1 remake that has all 3 games. I don't know how they're gonna do it, and I don't know how much they're gonna change. I'm hoping they don't change the story, but I mean, considering if we're using other remakes we've gotten these past few years as reference, then they probably wouldn't change anything, at least when it comes to the story. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, that is a lot more possible. But even but the thing is, I mean, especially for 3, God of War 3 has a very, I mean, beyond the fact that the camera isn't, movable, it has a very modern feel to it, I would say. So, but yeah, again, I don't know what they're gonna do. But regardless of what they do, it's gonna bring in new people. And new people who see, the thing is, there's a lot of people who don't really give a shit about God of War now, because when they think of God of War, they think of God of War 2018 Kratos, and they think of God of War 2018 gameplay. But if they knew about OG Kratos and the way he played too, and the soundtrack, which in my personal opinion, is far the soundtrack from the OG games is far superior. I'm sorry, but that's my personal opinion. That's my bias, okay? I've never claimed to be unbiased. I am very, 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 very biased toward the OG games, okay? I am. And not just because of the gameplay, soundtrack too. It's far superior. It's gonna bring in a lot of new people, and some at least will eventually come around and like the game's story so much, and maybe the gameplay, and they may want to experience the original games to see how different they are, and then they'll actually get to experience the true feel of the OG games of the Greek saga, and that is great. So I don't have a problem with remakes. I don't think remakes are bad. However, they are a sign that, yeah, obviously, companies want money and they can't have new ideas. Well, that's not true. There are new ideas, there are new games coming out. But the thing is, many of them flop. Why? Well, lack of creativity, checking some, I don't know, progressive check boxes. No, okay, I'm not. Again, I'm not necessarily progressive, but I'm also not necessarily the most progressive either. I mean, if you watched any of my other videos, you know that I do use slurs every now and then. You know, uh, for starters, I mean that's just an example, but I mean overall, I don't live in a country that is extremely progressive. I don't come from a family that is extremely progressive. Definitely not. So that's just how I am. How I am. It's just my upbringing. But I don't have anything against progressiveness necessarily, unless it's shoved down my throat a little too much. But I mean, see, the thing is that only happens if you play games, and the thing is, if a game really was too woke, I guess you could say, either a game or a remake was too woke, quote unquote, too woke, um, I just wouldn't play it, and that's it. And I would go on with the rest of my day. I don't have to hate play it and then make a video about it, complaining about how the industry is fucking dying, and every 5 seconds, and I get paid for that. That's what a lot of those reviewers do. They like, well, because YouTube, the algorithm rewards very extreme views because a lot of people agree with them. A lot of people agree with extreme views about something. People love to hate stuff as much as they will love to, well, love stuff. They love to hate stuff. So yeah. In my case, I'm not really a hater of anything. I don't really hate anything. Anyway, again, are remakes bad? No, I don't think they're bad, but they definitely show that obviously, since companies, which are comprised of people, by the way, want money because obviously people want money. I think that's one thing that people kind of seem to forget when they talk about it. See, I'm not an extremist in any way, as you're about to hear. Like I'm not necessarily a company hater either. The thing is, companies are made by people. Companies are comprised by people, and what do people want? People want money. So obviously, if people want money and companies are comprised of people, then obviously companies are going to want money, because then what do they do? How do they keep going? However, I do agree that there has been a bit of an outage of really, really, really good AAA games. We have gotten some, though I can't actually remember any right now. But either way, I know there have been. I'm not trying to send the message that every game is bad nowadays, because that's just not true. There always have been horrible games, slop games, as you would call them now. And I mean, with the advent of AI, there's going to be a lot more AI slop games. However, I'm not an AI hater, but that's a topic for another video. Um, so yeah, remakes are not bad, but they are a sign, well, yet another sign of companies just using old audiences or using old products that were made before that were better in order to cash in order to get some easy money, because all the players are going to want to experience the game again. Some are going to hate play it, but they don't give a shit about that. They're going to play it anyway. I mean, there's those those reviewers, those hate reviewers are gonna give them the money anyway. So they don't give a shit about that. In fact, they kind of thrive on the hate they get, I think. That's just nature. Like, we always need haters. And that's just the nature of it. I mean, we also need lovers, people who really, really love positivity and all that. And then there's the rest of us who are in the middle, who aren't just enamored by everything we see, but we also don't just hate everything we see now, because everything used to be better back in my day. Because that is a very, very, very dangerous view, to think that everything used to be better before, because you live in the past. Live in the now. There are good things now. Not everything has to be a remake. I don't hate remakes, but I do agree that remakes do show a lack of creativity from these companies, and so they have to resort to these old games and remaking them, and in many ways deleting some stuff that to them doesn't matter, but to the old players matters a lot. And to new players, that doesn't matter unless they find out about the old games, and then they realize too that yeah, it turns out, that they did delete a lot of stuff that actually did matter. But obviously, for them at the time, it didn't matter. But yeah, the takeaway is remakes can be good because they bring in more attention to the stuff that you like. And while yes, some people are just gonna come, they're gonna get the views they want, and then they're gonna go on to the next game. Some are actually gonna sit down and enjoy the game, enjoy the story the most they can, and then some select few of those are actually gonna go out of their way to find the original games and play them, and see how different they are from the remakes. And then they're gonna realize that the remakes are just garbage. No, that's not true. They're not garbage. But in many ways, they're not actually superior beyond graphics and voice acting, arguably. So yeah, I am for remakes, but I'm also for new ideas. So I'm glad that the indie space has new ideas. Anyway, sayonara, Mr. Mook out.